Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. My feet rested on a surface that quivered like gelatin, yet held my weight as if it were stone. In the dimness, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that defied my own heartbeat. A soft, diffused light seeped from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around me like a shroud. My skin prickled as if the very air were an invisible presence brushing against it. Every movement felt delayed, as though my body was guided by an unseen puppeteer. Silence loomed heavy, broken only by a distant hum, a reminder that I was not the only one here. That's what I remember, or think I remember. The image comes to me in fragments, like trying to recall a dream that slips away the moment you reach for it. But unlike a dream, this feels different, heavier, more real than the room I'm sitting in right now. I've been trying to piece together what happened for weeks now, maybe months. The timeline feels blurred, like someone took a photograph and smeared it while the ink was still wet. I know something occurred, something that changed me in ways I can't quite articulate. When I look in the mirror, the same face stares back, but behind my eyes there's a distance that wasn't there before, a gap where something used to be. The first concrete clue came when I was cleaning out my desk drawer. Buried beneath old receipts and forgotten business cards, I found a small digital recorder I didn't remember owning. The plastic casing felt warm against my palm, and when I held it closer, I could feel the faintest vibration running through it, like a heartbeat made of electricity. The device contained a single file. No label, no timestamp, just a series of numbers that meant nothing to me. When I pressed play, static filled my headphones, but underneath that white noise I could hear something else. My own voice, distant and hollow, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The audio quality was poor, as if the recording had been made through several layers of fabric, but the cadence was unmistakably mine. I listened to that file dozens of times, adjusting the volume, trying different headphones, but the words remained just beyond comprehension. What disturbed me most wasn't what I couldn't hear, but what I could. In the background, beneath my muffled voice and the static, there was breathing, not mine. The rhythm was all wrong, too slow and too deep, like something much larger than human lungs could produce. That night, lying in bed with the recorder on my nightstand, the first fragment returned. I was standing in a corridor that stretched impossibly long in both directions. The walls were smooth, almost organic in their curves, and they pulsed with that same rhythm I remembered from the breathing room. But this wasn't the same place. This was different, colder. The air tasted metallic, like pennies left in water for too long. Lights moved along the walls, not attached to any visible source, just points of illumination that drifted like lazy fireflies. They cast no shadows, which should have been impossible, but in that place, impossibility seemed to be the only constant. I tried to follow one of the lights with my eyes, but every time I focused on it directly, it would flicker and reappear somewhere else, always just outside my direct vision. I was walking, though I couldn't remember deciding to move. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being filtered through water before reaching my ears. With each step, the metallic taste grew stronger, and I became aware of a presence behind me, not following exactly, but keeping pace. When I slowed, it slowed. When I quickened my step, it matched my rhythm perfectly. The fragment ended there, cutting off like a film reel, snapping in half. I woke with the taste of metal still coating my tongue and a certainty that someone had been in my room while I slept. Nothing was disturbed, nothing was missing, but the air felt different, warmer, used. Over the following days, I found more evidence of my missing memory. A notebook I didn't recognize, filled with my own handwriting, but in a script that was somehow both familiar and foreign. The words were in a language I couldn't identify, though occasionally I would catch glimpses of meaning, like trying to remember a word in a foreign language you once knew. The pages smelled faintly of that indescribable scent from my fragments, new plastic and cold blood, and when I held the notebook up to the light, I could see impressions from pages that had been torn out. Someone, presumably me, had removed entire sections of whatever I had written. One page contained a rough sketch of a room. The drawing was crude, but I recognized it immediately as the breathing room from my first memory. In the center of the sketch, I had drawn a figure, not human, but not entirely alien either. The proportions were wrong in subtle ways, as if someone had tried to recreate a person from a description given by someone who had never seen one. Below the sketch, in letters pressed so hard into the paper they had nearly torn through, I had written a single word over and over again. The same word, repeated in increasingly frantic handwriting until it became an illegible scrawl, but I couldn't read it. Every time I tried to focus on the letters, they seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, like looking at text through moving water. The second fragment came while I was studying that sketch. The lights had gone out suddenly, completely, leaving me in a darkness so absolute it felt solid. I was back in that corridor, but now the organic walls were completely black and the floating lights had vanished. The only illumination came from ahead of me, a soft glow that seemed to beckon without warmth. I could hear my own breathing, amplified and echoing in the space around me, but underneath it was something else. Footsteps, not behind me this time, but approaching from the direction of the light. The sound was wrong, though. Too many impacts, as if whatever was walking had more than two legs, or perhaps legs that bent in ways that human joints couldn't accommodate. I wanted to turn around, to run back the way I had come, but my body wouldn't respond to my thoughts. I could only stand there, watching as the glow grew brighter and the footsteps grew closer. The metallic taste was overwhelming now, so strong it made my eyes water. Just before whatever was approaching came into view, I heard my own voice, the same hollow tone from the recording, speaking words I still couldn't understand. But this time, something answered back. The voice that responded was like mine, but played backwards, or spoken by someone whose mouth was shaped differently than a human mouth should be. The fragment ended as abruptly as the first, leaving me gasping in my chair, the notebook fallen to the floor. But something was different now. When I looked around my room, the shadows seemed deeper than they should be for the middle of the day. The mirror on my dresser reflected everything correctly except for one detail. My reflection was looking slightly to the left while I was facing straight ahead. When I turned my head to match what I saw in the mirror, my reflection remained looking to the left. I stopped using mirrors after that. The sound started 3 days later, soft at first, barely audible above the ambient noise of daily life. Electronic tones that shifted in frequency, rising and falling like a conversation in a language made of pure sound. They seemed to come from inside the walls, or perhaps from inside my own head. I could never quite locate the source. The sounds were always just quiet enough that I could convince myself I was imagining them, but they followed patterns that were too complex to be random. They would start with a low hum, gradually building in complexity until they resembled the static from my recording, then fade back to silence. The cycle repeated every few hours, always at slightly different intervals, as if whatever was generating them was learning, adapting. I tried recording the sounds, but every device I used captured only silence. The electronic tones existed only for me, in the space between my ears and my understanding. It was during one of these sound cycles that the third fragment emerged, more vivid and disturbing than the others. I was no longer in the corridor. I was back in the breathing room, but now I wasn't alone. The figure from my sketch was there, standing in the center of the space where the strange light converged. Up close, the wrongness of its proportions was even more apparent. It was roughly human-sized, but its limbs were too long, its joints bent at angles that suggested additional bones, or bones that curved in impossible directions. It wasn't facing me, but I knew it was aware of my presence. Its head, which was the right size but somehow the wrong shape, tilted in a way that indicated listening. The breathing walls pulsed faster now, as if excited or agitated by our proximity. I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, what this place was, why I was here, but my voice produced only that hollow, echoing tone I had heard on the recording. The words that came out weren't the words I had intended to say, weren't in any language I recognized, but somehow I understood their meaning perfectly as I spoke them. I was asking to remember. The figure turned then, and I saw its face, or the place where its face should have been. The features were human in their basic arrangement, but each element was subtly wrong. The eyes were the right color, but they reflected light like mirrors instead of absorbing it. The mouth was properly positioned, but when it opened to respond to my question, I could see that it continued much deeper than any mouth should, as if the opening went all the way through to the back of its head. When it spoke, using my voice but with that backwards quality, I understood that it wasn't granting my request to remember. It was asking me the same question. It wanted to remember too. The realization hit me with a clarity that was more terrifying than any of the strange imagery. This thing, whatever it was as confused as I was. It was missing pieces of its memory just as I was missing pieces of mine. We were both trying to reconstruct something that had been deliberately taken from us. But by whom and why? The fragment dissolved, leaving me standing in my kitchen with no memory of how I had gotten there. The clock on the microwave displayed numbers, but they shifted and changed every time I tried to read them, like the word in my notebook. The concept of sequential measurement had become unstable, unreliable. I found another notebook that night, this one hidden inside a book I was certain I had never read. The pages were filled with diagrams that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process, connected by lines that appeared straight until you followed them with your finger, at which point they curved in directions that shouldn't exist. At the bottom of each page, in handwriting that was definitely mine but more controlled than the frantic scrawling in the first notebook, I had written observations. Clinical notes about sensory experiences, descriptions of spatial distortions, measurements using units I didn't recognize. The tone was detached, scientific, as if I had been conducting an experiment rather than experiencing something traumatic. One entry caught my attention because I could almost remember writing it. The letters didn't shift and change like the others, remaining stable enough for me to read. The boundary between observer and observed continues to deteriorate. What I initially interpreted as external phenomena may be manifestations of internal restructuring. The question is no longer what is happening to me, but what I am becoming. Below this, in different ink, someone had added a single line. The process is reversible only during the initial phase. The handwriting was mine, but I had no memory of writing those words. More disturbing was the realization that the ink was still wet. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the gelatin stone surface under my feet, could smell that mixture of new plastic and cold blood growing stronger. The electronic sounds in the walls had evolved, becoming more complex, more like actual communication than random noise. Around what should have been dawn, though the light outside my windows seemed wrong, too blue and too diffuse, the final fragment came. I was standing in a room I hadn't seen before, but which felt more familiar than my own home. The walls were covered in mirrors, but each reflection showed a different version of the same scene. In some, I was alone. In others, the figure from the breathing room stood beside me. In a few, there were multiple figures, all with that same wrong-proportioned humanoid shape. But in one mirror, the most disturbing one, I saw myself as I truly was in that place. My proportions were wrong too. My limbs had elongated, my joints had multiplied, my face had restructured itself into something that was recognizably me but fundamentally other. I was looking at my reflection with eyes that reflected light instead of absorbing it, and when I opened my mouth to scream, the opening extended much deeper than it should have. I wasn't the observer in this place. I was another specimen, another subject in whatever experiment was being conducted. The other figures in the mirrors, I realized, weren't aliens or entities from somewhere else. They were people like me, people who had been brought to this place, changed, and then had their memories fragmented and redistributed. We were all trying to remember what had been done to us, but the memories we were recovering weren't entirely our own. The breathing room, the endless corridor, the mirror chamber, they were all part of the same structure. A facility designed to blur the boundaries between individual consciousness, to create a shared experience that could be studied and manipulated. We weren't victims of abduction or supernatural encounter. We were participants in something far more systematic and intentional. But participants in what, and run by whom? The fragment ended, but this time I didn't return to my normal environment. I found myself standing in my kitchen, but the room was subtly different. The appliances were the same, but their positions had shifted slightly. The window looked out onto the same view, but the angle was wrong, as if the entire building had been rotated a few degrees. On the counter next to the coffee maker I was certain hadn't been there moments before was a new notebook. This one was filled with my handwriting, but the text was perfectly legible, no shifting letters or foreign languages. The entries were dated, though the dates used a calendar system I didn't recognize. The final entry, written in ink that was still drying, read, "The integration process is nearly complete. Memory fragments from multiple subjects have been successfully merged and redistributed. Individual identity markers are dissolving as planned. Subjects continue to believe they are investigating their own experiences, unaware that they are collectively reconstructing a shared narrative designed to facilitate the final phase of consciousness transfer." Below this, in handwriting that was definitely mine but felt like someone else's thoughts, was a question. If I am writing this, am I the subject or the researcher? And does the distinction matter anymore? I set the notebook down and walked to where my bathroom mirror used to hang. The wall was blank now, but I could see my reflection anyway, suspended in the empty air. I was still recognizably myself, but the wrongness was spreading. My proportions were shifting, my features rearranging themselves into something more efficient, more adapted to the environment I was becoming part of. The electronic sounds in the walls had stopped. In their place was something much more unsettling, silence that felt alive, breathing silence that pulsed with the rhythm of a heart much larger than my own. I understand now that I was never investigating my own missing memories. I was being fed fragments from a collective experience, pieces of a puzzle that was never meant to be solved by any individual consciousness. The confusion, the sense of wrongness, the feeling that something had been taken from me, these were all part of the process. But understanding doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes the situation more disturbing. I know now that my investigation was guided, that every clue I found was placed deliberately, that even this moment of clarity is probably part of the design. The question that remains, the one that keeps me awake in this place that looks like my home but isn't quite right, is simple. If I know all this, if I understand what has been done to me and why, then who exactly am I now? And more importantly, who is writing these words? The notebook in front of me is filling with text I don't remember composing, in handwriting that is mine but feels foreign. The words appear as I think them, but I'm no longer certain the thoughts are originating from what I used to consider my own mind. Outside my windows, the light continues to be wrong, too blue and too diffuse, coming from a sky that looks familiar but feels like a careful reproduction rather than the real thing. The silence breathes around me, patient and alive, waiting for something I don't think I want to understand. And somewhere in a place that might be memory or might be happening right now, my feet rest on a surface that quivers like gelatin yet holds my weight like stone, while walls breathe around me and something that was once human learns to remember what it chose to forget. Story 2. The evening sun cast long golden shadows through the lace curtains, filling the room with a gentle warmth. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the air, a reminder of new beginnings. But somewhere above, the faintest rustle broke the stillness. A dusty box had shifted slightly in the attic. The house felt alive, holding its breath, as if waiting for someone to notice the secret it held. Nothing happened that night. I need to make that clear from the start. I was just tired, probably overworked from moving into the new place. The mind plays tricks when you're exhausted, and I'd been carrying boxes all day. So when I say nothing happened, I mean exactly that, nothing at all. I didn't go up to the attic. Why would I? The realtor had mentioned it was just storage space, nothing important. Old insulation and maybe some leftover materials from previous owners. I had no reason to climb those narrow wooden steps, no reason at all to push open that small door at the top. The sound I heard was just the house settling. Old houses do that, everyone knows. The wood expands and contracts, pipes shift, foundations adjust. It wasn't footsteps. Definitely not footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. That would be impossible anyway, since the attic floor was just bare joists with insulation between them. No one could walk up there without falling through. I stayed downstairs and unpacked books. That's all I did. I arranged them on the shelves by the window where the evening light was fading into something softer, something that didn't quite reach the corners of the room anymore. The shadows weren't moving. Shadows don't move unless something is casting them, and there was nothing up there to cast anything. When I heard the scraping sound, I knew it was just mice. Had to be mice dragging something across the floor that didn't exist. Mice are surprisingly strong for their size. They can move objects much heavier than themselves. So that long, drawn-out scraping noise, like something being dragged slowly from the front of the house toward the back, was perfectly normal, completely explainable. I didn't look up at the ceiling. There was no point, but if I had looked up, I wouldn't have seen anything anyway. Certainly not the faint outline of dust falling in a straight line, as if something heavy was being pulled directly above me. Dust falls randomly in old houses. It doesn't follow patterns or trace specific paths across the ceiling in perfect parallel lines. The temperature didn't change either. I was just nervous about the new house, and nervousness can make you feel cold even when you're sweating. The thermostat read 72 degrees the whole time. I checked it several times just to be sure. though I couldn't explain why the air near the stairs felt different, thicker somehow, like breathing through wet fabric. I made tea to calm my nerves, nothing unusual about that. The kettle whistled normally, the water boiled at the right temperature, and the steam rose straight up toward the ceiling where it disappeared into the growing darkness above. I didn't notice that the whistling stopped abruptly, cut off mid-note as if someone had lifted the kettle from the burner. But I was downstairs in the kitchen, and the kettle was downstairs with me, so that's impossible. The silence that followed was just regular silence. Houses get quiet in the evening. People stop moving around, traffic dies down, even the birds settle in for the night. It wasn't the kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. Silence can't listen. It can't wait or anticipate or hold its breath. And it definitely can't respond to your movements, growing deeper when you stop walking and lighter when you start again. I unpacked more boxes to stay busy. Kitchen utensils, bathroom supplies, winter clothes I wouldn't need for months, normal moving activities. I wasn't avoiding anything. There was nothing to avoid. I just preferred to stay on the ground floor where the lighting was better and the rooms felt more settled. The scratching sound was definitely mice, or maybe squirrels in the walls. Small animals make all sorts of noises when they're building nests or looking for food. The fact that it sounded like fingernails on wood didn't mean anything. Claws can sound very similar to fingernails, especially when they're moving slowly, deliberately, as if they're trying not to be heard. I didn't count the scratches. Why would I count them? But if I had been counting, which I wasn't, there might have been 7 long scrapes, then a pause, then 7 more. Animals don't follow patterns like that, of course. They're random creatures driven by instinct, not by any kind of deliberate rhythm or purpose. When I finally decided to go to bed, I chose the downstairs bedroom. The upstairs rooms weren't ready yet, still full of boxes and covered furniture. It had nothing to do with wanting to stay as far away from the attic as possible. Distance wasn't a factor in my decision. There was nothing to stay away from. I brushed my teeth with the bathroom door open so I could hear if anything else settled or shifted. Just being cautious about the new house, making sure everything was secure. The mirror above the sink reflected the hallway behind me, showing the stairs leading up to the second floor. I didn't see anything in that reflection. Certainly not a shadow that didn't match any of the furniture or doorways. A shadow that seemed to pause at the top of the stairs as if it was looking down at me. The bedroom was comfortable enough. The bed faced away from the door, which was fine because I wasn't worried about what might be in the hallway. I pulled the covers up and closed my eyes, listening to the normal sounds of a house at night. The refrigerator humming, the heater cycling on and off, the occasional creak of settling wood. I didn't hear the attic door open. That's impossible because I never went upstairs to see where the attic access was located. But if there had been an attic door, and if it had opened, it would have made a soft groaning sound as the hinges moved for the first time in years. Old hinges always protest when they're disturbed. They cry out like something in pain. Sleep came easily. I was exhausted from moving, and the bed was more comfortable than I'd expected. My dreams were normal, uneventful. I didn't dream about climbing narrow wooden steps in complete darkness, feeling my way up by touch alone. I didn't dream about pushing open a small door and crawling through into a space that smelled like dust and something else, something metallic and warm. The attic in my dream, which wasn't real because I was never actually there, had a single bare bulb hanging from the center beam. The light was too yellow, too steady, as if it had been burning for years without anyone turning it on. The floorboards were real up there, not just bare joists like I'd expected. Someone had finished the attic properly, creating a room that shouldn't have existed. I didn't see the photographs. They weren't scattered across the floor in neat rows, dozens of them, all showing the same house from different angles. Different seasons, different times of day, but always the same house. Always my house. The pictures weren't there, so I couldn't have noticed that they were all taken from impossible angles, as if the photographer had been floating outside the second-story windows or hovering above the roof. The box in the corner was just part of the dream. Dreams create objects that feel real but disappear when you wake up. This box was wooden old with metal clasps that had turned green with age. I didn't open it. I didn't lift the heavy lid and look inside at the contents that made no sense, that shouldn't have existed. Inside the box that I never opened were more photographs, but these were different. These showed the interior of the house, room by room, exactly as it looked now, with my furniture, my belongings, my life arranged in spaces I'd only finished setting up that day. The photos were old, though, yellowed at the edges and cracked with age. They showed my things in my house, but they were taken years before I'd ever seen this place. I didn't find the journal at the bottom of the box. It wasn't written in my handwriting, describing my daily routines, my habits, my preferences. It didn't contain detailed observations about my schedule, my work, my plans for renovating the house. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it knew things only I should know. It described thoughts I'd had but never spoken, decisions I'd made in private, fears I'd never shared with anyone. The last entry in the journal I never read was dated for tomorrow. It described my morning routine in perfect detail, including the breakfast I'd already planned to make and the phone call I intended to make to my family. It mentioned the discovery I would make in the basement, though I hadn't planned to go down there at all. When I woke up, I was in my bed, exactly where I'd fallen asleep. The covers were still tucked around me, and morning light was streaming through the windows. Everything was normal. I hadn't moved during the night. I certainly hadn't climbed up to an attic that I'd never seen and didn't know how to access. The dust on my feet was from the basement. I must have gone down there before bed to check the furnace or the water heater. New homeowners do that sort of thing. The dust was gray and fine, exactly like basement dust, not like the thicker, yellower dust you'd find in an attic that had been sealed for years. I showered and dressed, following my normal morning routine, the routine that had been described perfectly in a journal that didn't exist. I made breakfast, the same breakfast I'd planned the night before, though I couldn't remember planning it. Coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs. Simple, predictable, normal. The phone rang while I was eating. My sister, calling to check on how the move had gone. I told her everything was fine, the house was perfect, no problems at all. I didn't mention the sounds or the dreams or the feeling that someone had been watching me sleep. There was nothing to mention because nothing had happened. She asked about the basement, whether I'd checked for water damage or foundation issues. I told her I hadn't been down there yet, which was true. I hadn't been to the basement. The dust on my feet was from somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't quite remember, but that made perfect sense when I thought about it. After breakfast, I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. Just normal new homeowner curiosity. I started with the upstairs bedrooms, which were larger than they'd seemed during the initial walkthrough. The afternoon light made them feel warm and welcoming, nothing like the cold, watching darkness I remembered from my dreams. The attic access was exactly where I'd expected it to be, at the end of the upstairs hallway. A simple pull-down ladder, well-maintained and recently used. The hinges moved smoothly when I tested them, without the groaning protest of metal that hadn't moved in years. Someone had been taking care of this access point, keeping it functional. I didn't climb up into the attic. There was no reason to. I could see from the bottom of the ladder that it was just a storage space, empty except for some old insulation and a few pieces of lumber. No photographs, no wooden box, no impossible room with finished floors and electric lighting. Just an ordinary attic in an ordinary house. The basement was my next stop, though I couldn't remember deciding to go down there. The stairs were solid and well built, leading down to a finished space that was cleaner than I'd expected. No dust on the floor, no cobwebs in the corners. Someone had been maintaining this space too, keeping it ready for use. The photographs were hanging on the far wall, arranged in neat rows just like in my dream that wasn't real. But these were different photos, normal photos, showing the house's history through various owners and renovations. Family pictures, holiday celebrations, ordinary moments of ordinary people living ordinary lives in my house. I recognized some of the faces, though I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. The family in the most recent photos looked familiar, as if I'd met them somewhere or seen them around town. Their faces were kind, their smiles genuine, their eyes warm and welcoming. They looked like the sort of people who would take care of a house, who would maintain attic ladders and keep basements clean for the next owners. The final photograph in the series showed an empty house ready for new occupants. My house, exactly as it had looked when I'd first walked through it with the realtor. But in the corner of the photo, barely visible in the shadows by the front door, was a figure I almost recognized. Someone waiting patiently for the new owner to arrive, to settle in, to become comfortable enough to stop looking over their shoulder. I'm writing this now in my kitchen, with evening light filtering through the same lace curtains that welcomed me yesterday. The house feels settled around me, comfortable and familiar, as if I've lived here much longer than I have. Everything is exactly as it should be, normal, peaceful, safe. The sounds above me are just the house settling, like they were last night. The footsteps are just my imagination, tired from unpacking and adjusting to a new place. The scraping noise is definitely mice, and the soft groaning of hinges is just the wood expanding in the evening heat. I haven't looked at the photographs again. There's no need to. They're just normal family pictures documenting the happy lives of people who used to live here. People who took good care of the place and left it ready for someone new. People who probably moved somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere that suited their needs. Tomorrow I'll finish unpacking and start making this place truly mine. I'll arrange the furniture exactly how I want it, hang my own pictures on the walls, establish routines that will make this house feel like home. Everything will be perfect, exactly as I planned when I decided to buy this place. The realtor mentioned that the previous owners had left in a hurry, some kind of family emergency that required them to relocate quickly. They'd been sad to leave, she said, but circumstances had forced their hand. They'd loved the house, had taken excellent care of it, and had hoped the next owner would appreciate what they'd built here. I think I'm going to like it here. The house feels welcoming, as if it's been waiting for exactly the right person to come along. Someone who would understand its quirks, appreciate its history, and settle in comfortably for a long, long stay. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about the previous owners or wonder why they'd left so suddenly. The sun is setting now, casting those same long golden shadows through the lace curtains. In a few minutes it will be dark and the house will settle into its evening routine. The sounds will start again, soft and familiar, like a lullaby designed to help me sleep. I think tonight I'll try sleeping in one of the upstairs bedrooms, story 3. The first rays of dawn slipped through the window, casting a soft glow that glinted off dust motes suspended in the air. As the house gently stirred to life, the usual hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Yet there was a peculiar chill that persisted in the living room. The curtains billowed slightly, even though the windows were firmly shut. A single chair lay toppled, its legs awkwardly angled. It felt like the room was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to make the next move. I'm trying to remember, that's what I keep telling myself over and over, like a mantra that might unlock whatever's trapped behind the fog in my head. The chair, I keep coming back to that chair. It's not supposed to be like that, is it? Chairs don't just fall over by themselves. But then again, maybe they do. Maybe I don't know anything anymore. The doctors say it's normal, memory gaps, fragments. They use words like trauma response and psychological defense mechanisms, but their voices sound like they're coming from underwater. Everything sounds like that now, muffled, distant, like I'm listening to the world through thick glass. I remember the smell first, always the smell. Metal and dampness like coins left in a wet pocket. It clings to the back of my throat even now, weeks later. Or is it months? Time doesn't work the way it used to. The smell comes in waves, usually when I'm not expecting it. When I'm brushing my teeth or making coffee or doing something perfectly normal. Then suddenly I'm drowning in that metallic dampness and my hands start shaking. The refrigerator hum, that's important somehow. I can feel it in my bones, that low vibration that never stops. But it wasn't just the refrigerator, was it? There was something else humming, something deeper, something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur around the edges. I can almost hear it now, just at the edge of perception, like tinnitus, but more alive somehow. My therapist wants me to write things down. She says it might help the memories surface naturally, without forcing them. But what if I don't want them to surface? What if there's a reason they're buried so deep? Sometimes I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for something terrible to crash through the careful walls I've built around whatever happened in that room. The curtains moved, I'm certain of that much, billowing like there was wind, but the windows were closed. I checked them myself twice, 3 times. The latches were secure, the seals tight, so why did the fabric dance like that? Like invisible hands were running through it, playing with the folds. I stood there watching for what felt like hours, waiting for it to happen again. It never did, not while I was watching. There's a sound I can't place. It comes to me in dreams, or what I think are dreams. A rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on wood, patient, persistent. Sometimes it's fast, urgent. Other times it's slow, methodical, like someone counting down. I wake up with my heart pounding, my sheets soaked in sweat, and that tapping still echoing in my ears. I've searched every room in this house, looking for loose shutters or settling wood or anything that could explain it. Nothing. The chair fell during the night, I'm almost sure of that. I went to bed and it was upright. In the morning it was on its side, legs splayed at unnatural angles, like it had been knocked over in a hurry, or maybe pushed. The carpet around it was disturbed, fibers pressed down in patterns that didn't make sense. Footprints maybe, but whose? I live alone, I've always lived alone, haven't I? Sometimes I find things in my pockets that I don't remember putting there. Small things, a button that doesn't match any of my clothes, a piece of paper with writing I don't recognize, in handwriting that might be mine but looks wrong somehow. The letters are shaky, desperate, like someone was writing in the dark or while their hand was being forced. The words don't make sense, fragments of sentences about doors and lights and waiting. The light under the door, that memory hits me like a physical blow sometimes. Golden light, warm and inviting, seeping through the gap at the bottom of a door I can't quite picture. But it felt wrong, too bright, too warm, like looking into the sun. I remember wanting to open that door and being terrified of opening that door at the same time. The contradiction makes my head hurt. Was I running? I have flashes of movement, of my feet hitting the floor in rapid succession. The sound echoing off walls, but running from what or to what? My legs remember the motion even when my mind doesn't. Sometimes I'll be walking normally and suddenly I'm running, my body taking over without permission, driven by some instinct I can't name. I always end up back in that room, staring at the fallen chair. The dust motes in the morning light, they moved wrong. I know how dust is supposed to move, lazy, random, following air currents. But these were different, purposeful, like they were being directed by something I couldn't see. swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When I tried to focus on them, they scattered, becoming normal again, but I could feel them watching me from the corners of my vision. There's a taste in my mouth that won't go away, copper and salt, like I've been biting my tongue, but my tongue is fine, no cuts, no swelling. The taste gets stronger when I try to remember, like my body is warning me to stop, to leave well enough alone, but I can't stop. The not knowing is worse than whatever truth is hiding in the shadows of my memory. I found scratches on the hardwood floor around the chair, deep gouges in the wood like something heavy had been dragged, or like something had been trying to hold on, clawing at the floor as it was pulled away. I ran my fingers along the scratches and they felt warm, not warm like they'd been recently made, but warm like they were alive, like they were still happening somehow in a time I couldn't access. The phone rang once, just once. When I answered, there was silence on the other end. Not the silence of no one there, but the silence of someone listening, breathing, waiting. I held the phone to my ear until the dial tone started, and even then I could swear I heard something underneath it. A whisper maybe, or that same rhythmic tapping transmitted through miles of wire. My reflection looks wrong in the mirror sometimes. Not different exactly, but like it's a second behind my movements, like it's copying me instead of being me. I've started avoiding mirrors when I can. The bathroom is the worst. The medicine cabinet mirror shows too much, reflects too deep. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the room behind me that don't match what's actually there. A door where there should be a wall, a figure standing where I know no one is. The cold spot in the living room hasn't gone away. It hovers right where the chair fell, a pocket of air that feels like winter even on the warmest days. I can map its exact boundaries now, the way it extends in a perfect circle about 3 feet across. Step into it and the temperature drops 20 degrees. Step out and you're warm again. It doesn't make sense, but then nothing makes sense anymore. I keep finding myself standing in that spot without remembering how I got there. I'll be reading or watching television or cooking dinner, and suddenly I'm in the cold, staring down at the space where the chair used to be. How long do I stand there? Minutes, hours. Time slips away like water through my fingers. Sometimes my feet are numb when I finally move, like I've been standing still for a very long time. The humming is getting louder, or maybe I'm getting better at hearing it. It's not just in the house anymore. It follows me outside to the store, to the doctor's office. A low throb that seems to emanate from underneath everything. From underground maybe, or from somewhere else entirely. It makes my vision swim and my hands tremble. People don't seem to hear it when I ask. They look at me with that careful expression people use around broken things. There's something I'm supposed to remember about the door. Not the one with the light underneath, but another door. One that shouldn't exist. I have the clearest memory of reaching for a handle that wasn't there before, of feeling wood and metal where there should have been empty wall. But when I try to focus on it, the memory dissolves like smoke, leaving only the sensation of my palm pressed against something solid and real and impossible. The writing on the paper in my pocket is getting clearer, or maybe I'm getting better at reading my own handwriting when it's been distorted by fear. It talks about waiting, about something that comes when you're not looking, about the importance of keeping very still when the humming gets loud. I don't remember writing these words, but they feel true in a way that makes my chest tight. I've started leaving the lights on at night, all of them. The electricity bill will be enormous, but I can't bear the darkness anymore. In the dark, the humming gets louder and the cold spot spreads, and I can feel things moving just outside my vision. Shapes that shouldn't be there, doing things I don't want to understand. The light keeps them at bay, but just barely. I can feel them pressing against the edges of the illumination, patient and hungry. The chair is upright again. I don't remember setting it up. This morning I came into the living room and there it was, perfectly positioned, as if nothing had ever happened. But the scratches in the floor are still there. The cold spot remains, and now there's something else. an indentation in the chair's cushion like someone has been sitting in it, someone heavier than me. The fabric is still compressed, still holding the shape of a body I never saw. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. The alternative is that something impossible happened in this room, something that broke the normal rules of how the world works. I'm not sure which option scares me more. Madness, at least, can be treated. But if the world itself has cracks in it, if reality can be violated by things that shouldn't exist, then nowhere is safe. Nothing is certain. The memories are getting stronger. That's what terrifies me most. Whatever protective fog my mind wrapped around the truth is starting to lift. I can feel the real memory lurking just below the surface, like something massive moving under dark water. Soon it will breach. Soon I'll have to face whatever happened in this room, whatever knocked over that chair and left those scratches and filled the air with impossible cold. I think it's still here, whatever it was, whatever it is, waiting in the spaces between seconds, in the gaps where my memory fails, biding its time until I remember enough to see it clearly, until I remember enough to let it back in. The humming is so loud now I can barely think. The chair is rocking slightly, though there's no wind, no vibration, nothing to explain the motion. The temperature is dropping throughout the house, not just in that one spot. And underneath it all, that rhythmic tapping is back, faster now, urgent. I think it knows I'm starting to remember. I think it's excited. I should stop writing. I should put down this pen and walk away and never think about any of this again. But I can't. The truth is rising whether I want it to or not. And something tells me that when it finally surfaces, when I finally remember what really happened in this room, I won't be alone anymore. The curtains are moving again. The windows are still closed. It's time, story 4. The tick of the clock faltered, pausing mid-second as if deciding when to proceed. Disjointed reflections danced in patterns on the floor, shifting with the light like a memory half remembered. A constant routine, yet the air tasted metallic, richer, and the walls seemed to lean closer, just marginally, as if listening. The carpet underfoot felt unfamiliar, fibers misaligned, guiding footsteps into new paths that should have remained unchanged. I reached for the door, its handle cooler than the last touch, and slipped in my grasp. It opened wide on its own, welcoming but uninvited, revealing more than it should. To whoever finds this, if anyone ever does. I don't know why I'm writing this down, maybe because I need to get it out of my head before it consumes what's left of me. Maybe because you deserve to know what happened here, in this place that used to feel like home. I've carried this weight for so long now, and I can feel myself disappearing piece by piece, like smoke dissolving into air. You won't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either before. There's this sound that follows me now, not quite a hum, not quite breathing. It starts low, somewhere behind my left ear, and spreads through my skull like warm honey. I first heard it that night when everything changed, when the familiar became foreign and the world tilted just enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about reality. I keep trying to remember how it began, but the memories slip away like water through my fingers. There was the door opening on its own, yes, but before that there was something else. A feeling of being watched through windows that faced only walls. The sensation of footsteps matching mine in perfect synchronization, but when I'd stop, they'd continue for just a heartbeat longer. The reflections were wrong first. I noticed it in the bathroom mirror, how my eyes seemed darker, deeper, like looking into wells that had no bottom. Not dramatically different, just enough to make me pause, to make me lean closer, to make me wonder if I was losing my mind. The person staring back at me looked tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Sleep became impossible anyway. I'd lie in bed listening to that sound, that almost breathing, and feel the air pressure change around me. The darkness felt thick, tangible, like it was pressing against my skin with tiny invisible fingers. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that shouldn't exist in a room with no light source. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the gradual realization that I was changing too. My coworkers started looking at me strangely, not with concern or curiosity, but with the blank confusion you'd show a stranger who'd walked into your conversation uninvited. People I'd known for years would pause mid-sentence when they saw me, as if trying to remember where they knew me from. The barista at my usual coffee shop asked for my order like she'd never seen me before, even though I'd been going there every morning for 3 years. I began avoiding mirrors altogether, not because of what I might see, but because of what might be missing. My reflection felt borrowed, like I was wearing someone else's face and it didn't quite fit right. The eyes were still wrong, always the eyes. The sound grew stronger. At night, I'd walk through my apartment and feel like an intruder in my own space. The furniture seemed arranged differently, though I knew I hadn't moved anything. The walls breathed with an almost imperceptible rhythm. The air tasted of copper and something else, something organic and ancient that made my teeth ache. I started leaving lights on, but they dimmed on their own, not all at once, but gradually, like the darkness was drinking the brightness slowly, savoring it. I'd wake up in complete blackness, my hand reaching for switches that no longer seemed to work, though in the morning everything would be normal again. Normal, what a strange word that's become. My phone stopped recognizing my voice commands. My laptop asked me to verify my identity through security questions I couldn't remember setting up. Even my own handwriting looked foreign when I tried to journal about what was happening. The letters felt clumsy, like my hands had forgotten how to form the shapes of words I'd written thousands of times before. But the sound knew me. It wrapped around my thoughts like an old friend, whispering things I couldn't quite understand, but somehow felt in my bones. It told me stories without words, painted pictures behind my eyelids of places I'd never been but recognized with the deep certainty of coming home. I think I'm disappearing. Not dying, that would be too simple, too clean. I'm fading, becoming translucent around the edges. People look through me now instead of at me. Conversations happen around me as if I'm not there. I've started to wonder if I'm actually speaking when I think I'm talking, or if the words are just echoing in my head while my mouth stays silent. The door still opens on its own sometimes. I'll be sitting in my chair and I'll hear the soft click of the handle, the whisper of hinges that need oil. But when I look, there's nothing beyond the threshold except that breathing darkness, patient and welcoming and hungry. I dream of walking through it. In these dreams, I'm not afraid anymore. The sound becomes a symphony, and the darkness feels like coming home after a long journey. I understand, finally, what's been trying to tell me all along. But when I wake up, the understanding slips away, leaving only the echo of recognition and a longing so deep it makes my chest ache. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe this is what a breakdown feels like from the inside, slow and subtle, and so gradual you don't notice until you're already gone. Maybe the door never opened on its own, and the reflections were always wrong, and I'm just finally seeing what was there all along. But I don't think so. I think something found me that night, something that lives in the spaces between seconds, in the pause between heartbeats, in the silence that exists just before sound. It's been calling to me ever since, and I've been answering whether I wanted to or not. The sound is louder now. It's become a roar, a waterfall of whispers that drowns out everything else. My reflection is barely visible in mirrors, just a suggestion of a person who might have been there once. People walk through the space where I'm standing as if I'm made of air. I think it's time to go through the door. If you're reading this, don't look for me. Don't try to understand what happened here. Just know that I made a choice, finally, to stop fighting what I was becoming and embrace what I was meant to be. The sound isn't frightening anymore. It's beautiful, like music played on instruments that don't exist, like lullabies sung in languages that predate words. The door is opening again. I can hear it, that soft click, that gentle whisper. The darkness beyond isn't empty anymore. It's full of possibility, full of answers to questions I didn't know how to ask, full of home. I'm not afraid anymore. The sound has become part of me, or maybe I've become part of it. The distinction doesn't matter now. What matters is that I finally understand what the reflections were trying to show me, what the breathing darkness was trying to teach me, what the door has been offering all along. I'm ready to accept. The clock has stopped ticking entirely now. Time feels suspended, crystallized, like I'm existing in the space between moments. My handwriting is becoming harder to read, even to myself, as if my fingers are forgetting how to hold the pen. But I needed to finish this, needed to leave some record of what happened here, some explanation for the empty rooms and the lingering smell of copper and the door that sometimes opens on its own. Don't be afraid if you hear the sound. It's not malevolent, just different, older than the world we think we know. If you see the reflections dancing wrong in the light, if you feel the walls leaning closer to listen, if you notice the air tasting of metal and memory, just remember that change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's coming home. The door is wide open now. The darkness beyond is singing. I'm going home. Story 5. The zipper tugged halfway before catching, teeth misaligned without reason. Every coat was hung the same, but one sleeve sagged inward, deflated. Lingering scents shifted just enough to gnaw at familiarity. Eyes dive for the clock, the hands drift, nudging seconds offbeat. Each tick usually comforted, but now whispered a discordant beat. In my palm, the keys are cold, one swapped for another. A door closed softly in the distance, not one I'd opened, but it did. I keep trying to remember what came before that moment. The doctors say trauma fragments things, scatters pieces across your mind like broken glass. Some shards cut deep when you try to gather them. Others slip through your fingers before you can feel their edges. There's this hum. It follows me through every memory I try to reconstruct. Not electrical, not mechanical, something else. Something that makes my teeth ache when I focus on it too long. I hear it now as I speak these words, threading through my thoughts like wire through fabric. The hallway, I remember the hallway clearly sometimes. Fluorescent lights overhead, but one flickered in a pattern that felt deliberate. 3 quick pulses, then darkness, then 3 again. My footsteps echoed wrong against the walls. Too many echoes, too many footsteps for one person walking alone. But was I alone? The smell of metal fills my nostrils when I try to push deeper. Copper pennies left in rain. My fingertips remember touching something smooth, something that shouldn't have been warm but was. The texture haunts me more than any image could. Like skin, but not skin, like plastic, but breathing. I had a routine before, coffee at the same time, same cup, same chair by the window. The newspaper folded in thirds, everything in its place. Order was my religion then, but the memory of that morning feels contaminated now, like someone else lived it and left it behind for me to find. The chair was moved, just slightly. Just enough that the light hit my face differently when I sat down. The coffee tasted of salt. The newspaper had words that didn't match the pictures, sentences that ended in the middle of thoughts. I kept reading anyway, desperate for normalcy, even counterfeit normalcy. There was a figure at the edge of my vision that morning, standing perfectly still behind the glass door that led to the garden. When I turned to look directly, nothing, but the afterimage burned in my peripheral sight. Tall, impossibly thin, wearing something that might have been clothes or might have been shadow. My hands shake when I try to write about this. The pen feels foreign between my fingers. Sometimes the ink flows backward, words unwriting themselves before I can finish them. The paper absorbs too much, like it's thirsty for something more than just ink. The basement comes back in waves that make me nauseous. Stone steps leading down into darkness that felt alive. I carried a flashlight, but the beam bent at wrong angles, illuminating things that weren't there when I looked again. The air grew thick as soup. Each breath required effort, required intention. Why was I going down there? What was I looking for? The hum grew stronger the deeper I went. It vibrated through the soles of my feet, up my spine, into the base of my skull where it nested like something hungry. I remember pressing my palms against my ears, but the sound came from inside now. It had made itself at home in my bones. There was a door at the bottom, red paint peeling like skin after sunburn. The handle turned before I touched it. The hinges made no sound as it swung open. Beyond the threshold, space seemed to fold in on itself. The flashlight beam disappeared into nothing, swallowed by an absence so complete it had weight. I stepped forward anyway. The floor gave slightly under my feet, soft and yielding like walking on someone's stomach. My skin prickled with electricity that wasn't quite electricity. Something brushed against my shoulder, a touch too deliberate to be accidental, too gentle to be threatening. I spun around, but the darkness had closed behind me like water. That's when I heard the breathing that wasn't mine. Slow, measured, coming from everywhere and nowhere, in rhythm with my heartbeat but slightly off, like an echo arriving before the original sound. I reached out blindly and my fingers found fabric, then flesh beneath it, warm flesh that moved with breath that shouldn't exist. The thing spoke without words, communication through vibration, through the hum that had been calling me all along. It wanted something from me, something I didn't understand how to give. The message pressed against my consciousness like fingers against glass, leaving smudges I couldn't quite read. I tried to run then. The darkness released me reluctantly, pulling at my clothes, my hair, my skin. The stairs stretched longer than they had on the way down. Each step upward felt like climbing through molasses. The hum followed, angry now, insistent. When I finally reached the top, gasping and sweating, the door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the entire house. But the sound was wrong. It came from the wrong direction, from above instead of below. I looked up. The ceiling had changed. Cracks spread across it like a spider web, and through the gaps something pulsed with a light that hurt to perceive directly. The hum had followed me up, but it wasn't coming from the basement anymore. It was coming from inside the walls, inside the electrical outlets, inside the very air I breathed. The next few hours blurred together. I remember checking every door, every window, every lock, all secure, all exactly as they should be. But the house felt invaded anyway, contaminated by presence I couldn't locate or name. Shadows fell at impossible angles. Reflections in mirrors showed rooms that weren't quite the right shape. I tried to call anyone, but the phone produced only static when I lifted the receiver. The static had rhythm, though. It pulsed in the same pattern as the flickering light in the hallway. 3 quick bursts, then silence, then 3 again. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that touch on my shoulder again, gentle but insistent, claiming. When I forced my eyes open, the darkness in my bedroom had texture, had depth that shouldn't exist in a simple absence of light. Something moved within it, patient and purposeful. I started leaving lights on, all of them, every bulb in the house blazing against whatever wanted to emerge from shadow. But the electricity began to fail in sequence, room by room, as if something was consuming it from within the wires themselves. The last light to die was in the bathroom, where I'd barricaded myself with a chair wedged under the door handle. In the final moments before complete darkness, I saw my reflection in the mirror above the sink, but I wasn't alone in the glass. The figure from the garden stood behind me, close enough that I should have felt its breath on my neck, close enough that its hands rested on my shoulders with familiar weight. When I spun around, nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, only my own face stared back, but my eyes held knowledge I didn't remember acquiring. My mouth moved without my permission, forming words in a language I'd never learned but somehow understood. The darkness fell like a curtain. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about exhaustion, about stress, about the mind's capacity for self-protection through selective forgetting. They used words like breakdown and hallucination with the confidence of people who'd never felt reality bend around them like heated plastic. But I remember the taste of that basement air. I remember the weight of hands that shouldn't exist. I remember the hum that rewrote my bones from the inside out. They sent me home eventually. The house looked exactly the same, but felt like a stage set built to resemble my life. Everything in its proper place, but somehow hollow, somehow wrong. The basement door was painted fresh white, but I could see the red bleeding through if I stared long enough. I don't go down there anymore. I don't even look at the door. But sometimes, late at night when the house settles into silence, I hear that familiar hum rising from below. It's patient. It's waiting. It knows I'll come back eventually, when the fragments in my mind finally arrange themselves into a picture I can't ignore. The zipper on my coat still catches at exactly the same spot. The clock still ticks slightly off rhythm. The keys in my palm are still the wrong temperature for metal that's been sitting in warm air. But now I understand these aren't glitches or coincidences. They're invitations. The thing in the basement is calling me back, using the language of small wrongnesses, tiny impossibilities that only I can perceive. It's been very patient, letting me think I escaped, letting me believe the doctors and their reasonable explanations. But the hum is growing stronger again. The shadows in my peripheral vision are gaining substance. The touch on my shoulder comes more frequently now, more insistent. I think it's almost time to go back downstairs. I think it's almost time to remember what I agreed to. The door is calling, and this time I don't think I'll be coming back up. Story 6. It wasn't unusual for the lights to flicker in the hallway. I always assumed the bulbs needed replacing, but no one seemed to mind enough to change them. There was a certain rhythm to the way the shadows danced, a regularity that often went unnoticed by others. The mail sat unopened on the table, a collection of envelopes stacking higher each day, all bearing the same return address. I never bothered with them. The bills would be paid or they wouldn't. When I walked past the window, I didn't look outside. The curtain fell just right, obscuring what lay beyond. I noticed the door wasn't fully closed, but I let it be. It was better that way. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I'm writing because I can't carry this anymore. The weight of it sits behind my ribs like a stone I swallowed years ago, growing heavier with each breath. You won't believe what I'm about to tell you. Hell, I don't believe it myself most days, but it happened, or maybe it didn't. Maybe that's the point. I've never told anyone about the 3 weeks when everything changed. Not the doctor who asked why I looked so tired. Not my sister when she called, worried about the silence. Not even myself, really, until now. But I'm leaving soon, and I need to put this somewhere. Consider it a warning or a confession, or just the ramblings of someone who stared too long into something that stared back. It started with the humming. Not the lights in the hallway, though they kept their rhythm, always that same flicker-pause flicker. This was different, a sound that seemed to come from inside the walls, or maybe inside my head, low and constant like electricity running through water. I'd wake up at night and it would be there, threading through my dreams, pulling me toward consciousness, but never quite letting me surface completely. You know that feeling when you're falling asleep and suddenly jolt awake, convinced you're falling. It was like that, but in reverse. Like I was falling upward, through layers of something thick and warm, and the humming was my only anchor. I started staying awake longer. Sleep felt dangerous somehow. The humming was stronger in the dark, and with it came the sense that I wasn't alone. Not in the way you feel when someone's in the next room. More like the way you feel when you're certain someone's watching you, but every time you turn around, there's nothing there. Except I stopped turning around after the first few nights. The mail kept coming, same return address, same careful handwriting. I'd see the envelopes through the glass door before I even opened it, and my stomach would drop. Not because I knew what they were, I never opened a single one, but because something about seeing them there, waiting, made the humming louder, made the air in the hallway thicker. I started avoiding the hallway altogether. But you can't avoid the hallway forever when you live in a place with only one way in and out. So I'd run, literally run from the front door to my bedroom, eyes fixed on the floor, pretending I couldn't see the way the shadows moved wrong. Pretending I couldn't feel the temperature drop as I passed the table with its growing stack of envelopes. The curtain by the window became my lifeline. As long as I didn't look outside, as long as that fabric stayed between me and whatever was out there, I could pretend everything was normal. I could pretend the shapes I glimpsed in my peripheral vision were just trees moving in the wind or clouds passing overhead. I could pretend the humming was just old pipes or a neighbor's air conditioner or anything other than what it actually was. What was it, you ask? I wish I could tell you. I wish I had words for the thing that lived in those 3 weeks, the presence that filled up all the empty spaces in my apartment and then started filling up the spaces inside me too. But language is too small, too human. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's never seen or music to someone who's never heard. You end up with metaphors that crumble as soon as you speak them. The door that wouldn't close properly became a mouth. Always slightly open, always breathing. I'd push it shut before bed and wake up to find it ajar again, that thin line of darkness like a crack in reality itself. I stopped trying to close it, stopped sleeping in the bedroom altogether, actually. Started making a nest on the couch, wrapped in every blanket I owned, facing away from the hallway. But facing away didn't help, because by then I could feel it behind me. Not watching that implies eyes, implies something human. This was more like being known, completely, intimately known by something that had no business knowing me at all. My reflections started looking wrong around the second week. Not dramatically wrong, not horror movie wrong, just off, like someone had adjusted the contrast slightly or changed the angle by a few degrees. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the bathroom mirror and feel a jolt of non-recognition. Who is that person? Why do they look so tired? Why do their eyes seem to be focusing on something just over my shoulder? I stopped looking in mirrors after that. The humming got louder, or maybe I got more sensitive to it. Hard to tell the difference when you're living on 3 hours of sleep and whatever food you can find in the back of the refrigerator. I was afraid to go grocery shopping, afraid to leave the apartment for more than a few minutes at a time. What if I came back and it was gone? What if I came back and it had grown stronger? Both possibilities terrified me equally. People started looking at me strangely. The woman at the corner store who usually smiled and asked about my day just stared. The mailman who always waved when he saw me through the window walked past like I wasn't there. Even my own reflection seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Maybe I was disappearing. Maybe whatever was humming in the walls was slowly erasing me, taking little pieces each day until there wouldn't be enough left to matter. Maybe that's what the envelopes were, receipts for parts of myself I'd already lost. I tried to leave once, packed a bag and everything, made it as far as the front door before the humming rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. The hallway stretched out in front of me like a tunnel, the flickering lights creating a strobe effect that turned everything into a series of still photographs. Shadowlight, and in each moment of illumination, I could see something that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, just a presence, a thickening of the air that moved with intention. It was waiting for me to step into the hallway, waiting with the patience of something that existed outside of time, outside of the small human concerns that used to matter to me. I put the bag down and went back to the couch. The third week was when things got really strange. The humming stopped being a sound and became a feeling instead, like having a tuning fork pressed against your bones, vibrating through your entire skeleton. I could feel it in my fingernails, in the roots of my hair, in the soft spaces between my ribs. And I started to understand things I shouldn't have understood. Not words exactly, more like concepts that arrived fully formed in my mind, carrying information I hadn't asked for and didn't want. I learned that the door had always been open, that closing it was just a game I played to feel safe. I learned that the mail wasn't mail at all, but something else wearing the shape of envelopes, something that grew stronger each day I ignored it. I learned that the humming wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from me. By the end of the third week, I couldn't tell where I ended and the presence began. When I looked at my hands, they seemed translucent, like I was becoming part of the furniture, part of the walls, part of whatever lived in the spaces between things. The apartment felt bigger somehow, full of rooms I'd never noticed before, corridors that led to places that couldn't possibly exist within the physical boundaries of the building. I could walk down the hallway now without fear because I was part of what lived there. The shadows didn't dance around me anymore, they danced with me, through me, as if I'd become another fixture in their eternal rhythm. The mail kept coming, but I understood now that it was never meant for the person I used to be. It was meant for what I was becoming. The curtain by the window fell differently now, and sometimes I caught glimpses of what lay beyond. Not the street I remembered, not the familiar view of buildings and sky. Something else, something vast and patient and full of the same humming that had taken root in my bones. I should have been terrified. The person I used to be would have been terrified. But terror requires a certain solidity of self, a clear boundary between observer and observed. I was losing those boundaries, dissolving into something larger and stranger and infinitely more patient than human fear could comprehend. This letter is the last thing I'm doing as myself. Tomorrow or the next day or whenever the transformation completes itself, there won't be enough of me left to hold a pen or form coherent thoughts. I'll become part of the rhythm, part of the humming, part of whatever lives in the spaces we pretend are empty. Maybe you'll find this letter on the table with all the others. Maybe you'll be the next person to notice that the door doesn't close properly, that the lights in the hallway flicker with too much intention, that the shadows move like they're alive. Maybe you'll hear the humming and think it's just old pipes or electrical problems. If you do, remember this: don't try to fix it, don't try to understand it, and whatever you do, don't try to make it stop. It's bigger than you, older than you, and it's been waiting so much longer than you can imagine. Fighting it only makes the process more difficult. The humming isn't cruel, it's not evil. It's just hungry for connection, for communion, for someone to share the vast loneliness of existing between worlds. I'm not disappearing, I'm expanding, becoming part of something that was always there, always humming just below the threshold of human perception. I used to think I was losing my mind. Now I understand that I was finding something much larger, something that makes the small concerns of human life seem as distant and irrelevant as childhood fears. The lights are flickering again, the same rhythm they've always had, the rhythm I'm finally learning to match. The door is open, it was always open, and the mail sits on the table like offerings to a god whose name can't be spoken in any human language. I can feel myself becoming part of the pattern now, part of the dance of shadows and light, part of the eternal humming that runs beneath everything like a river of electricity and intention. If you're reading this, it means you've already started to hear it too. Welcome. The transformation is beautiful once you stop fighting it. Story 7. The pen rolled to a stop on the wooden surface, leaving a faint trail in its wake. My fingers brushed against the paper, its texture uneven yet familiar. The air carried a subtle hint of something elusive, a whisper of ink long dried. A chilled draft nudged the hairs on my neck, though the windows were sealed. My eyes scanned the room, but it was the shadows that seemed to shift, concealing what I couldn't see. The air thickened, and in that stillness the scent faded, leaving an unsettling calm. I know now that I cannot take back what I've written. The words have settled into the paper like blood into cloth, permanent and irreversible. My hand trembles not from fear, but from the weight of completion. There's a strange peace in knowing it's over, even as my mind recoils from what I've done. The room breathes around me, walls expanding and contracting with each of my shallow breaths. I am changed, I am finished, and somehow I am exactly where I was always meant to be. But before this moment of terrible clarity, there was the writing itself. My hand moved across the page with a fluidity that wasn't mine. The words poured out like water through a broken dam, each sentence more urgent than the last. I watched my own fingers form letters I didn't remember choosing, spelling out truths I didn't want to acknowledge. The pen felt hot between my fingers, almost burning, yet I couldn't release it. My wrist ached from the constant motion, but stopping felt impossible, like trying to halt my own heartbeat. The paper beneath my palm grew warm, as if the ink were still wet and reactive. I could smell something metallic rising from the words, something that reminded me of copper pennies held too long in a sweaty palm. The room had grown darker as I wrote, though I couldn't remember the light changing. Shadows gathered at the edges of my vision, patient and watchful. My breathing had become shallow, rapid, matching the frantic pace of my writing. I knew I was documenting something that shouldn't be documented, confessing something that should remain buried, but the compulsion was stronger than my will to resist. Before the compulsive writing, there was the realization of what I had to do. I sat at the desk, staring at the blank page, understanding finally why I had been drawn here. The pen lay beside the paper like a surgical instrument waiting to be used. My hands rested flat on the wooden surface, feeling its grain, its imperfections, its history of other hands that had pressed against it. The room hummed with an expectation that made my skin crawl. I could feel the weight of unspoken words building in my chest, pressing against my ribs like a physical presence. My throat felt tight, constricted, as if something were wrapped around my neck. The air tasted different here, thicker, charged with an energy that made my teeth ache. I understood then that I hadn't come here by choice, not really. I had been guided, led, drawn by something that knew I would eventually sit in this chair and pick up this pen. The realization settled over me like cold water. I was here to write down what I had seen, what I had done, what had been done to me. The truth demanded documentation, and I was its chosen scribe. Before this understanding, there was the discovery of the room itself. I pushed open the door and found a space that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. The desk sat beneath a window that showed nothing but gray, as if the world beyond had been erased. Dust motes danced in the pale light, but they moved in patterns that defied the still air. The floorboards creaked under my feet with sounds that seemed to echo longer than they should, as if the room were much larger than it appeared. The walls were lined with empty shelves, but I could sense the phantom presence of books that had once filled them. The air held the ghost of old paper, leather bindings, and something else, something organic and slightly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. My footsteps sounded muffled, absorbed by the strange acoustics of the space. I approached the desk with the caution of someone approaching a sleeping animal. The wood was dark with age and wear, scarred by years of use. The pen lay across a single sheet of paper, positioned as if someone had just set it down and stepped away. But I knew no one else had been here. I knew this room had been waiting specifically for me. The chair pulled back smoothly, silently, inviting me to sit. And despite every instinct screaming at me to leave, I sat down. Before finding the room, there was the searching. I wandered through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The building felt alive around me, its walls breathing, its floors shifting subtly under my feet. Doors appeared where I didn't remember seeing them before, while others vanished entirely, leaving only smooth wall where an entrance had been moments earlier. My footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes sounding like multiple sets of feet, as if I were being followed by invisible companions. The temperature fluctuated without reason, patches of cold air alternating with pockets of uncomfortable warmth. The lighting was inconsistent, some areas bright enough to read by, others so dim I had to feel my way along the walls. I was looking for something specific, though I couldn't have said what. My hands trailed along door frames and wall surfaces, searching for some sign, some indication that I had found what I sought. My fingers tingled with each touch, as if the building were conducting some kind of energy through its structure. The sensation was both unpleasant and addictive. I tested door after door, each one revealing spaces that didn't match what I expected. Rooms that were too large for the building's exterior dimensions, others that were impossibly small, some that seemed to have no floor at all, just empty darkness extending downward. But I knew I would recognize the right room when I found it. Something inside me would know. Before the searching, there was the entrance. The building stood before me like a challenge, its facade weathered but imposing. The front door was heavy wood, scarred and stained, with iron hardware that felt cold even through my gloves. I pressed my palm against the surface and felt a vibration, subtle but unmistakable, as if machinery were running somewhere deep within the structure. The door opened without resistance, swinging inward on hinges that made no sound. The air that rushed out carried scents I couldn't identify, organic and mineral mixed together, like earth after rain, but with an underlying sharpness that made my nose burn. The interior was darker than the gray exterior light suggested it should be, as if the building swallowed illumination rather than reflecting it. I stepped across the threshold and felt the temperature drop immediately. My breath began to mist, though it hadn't been cold outside. The floor was solid beneath my feet, but it felt somehow unstable, as if it might give way without warning. Behind me, the door swung shut with a soft click that sounded like a lock engaging. I stood in the entryway, letting my eyes adjust to the dimness, feeling the building settle around me like a living thing acknowledging a new presence. The walls seemed to pulse gently, rhythmically, like a slow heartbeat. I knew then that leaving would not be as simple as entering had been. Before entering the building, there was the approach. I walked along a path that felt familiar despite my certainty that I had never been here before. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, scattered with debris I couldn't identify in the dim light. The building grew larger as I approached, its windows dark and reflective, showing me distorted images of myself that didn't quite match my movements. The air grew thicker with each step, harder to breathe, as if I were ascending to a high altitude. My heart rate increased, though I wasn't exerting myself. Something about the building's presence affected me physically, made my body react as if to a threat I couldn't consciously perceive. My hands began to shake, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I could hear sounds coming from within the structure, faint but persistent. Not voices exactly, but something that might have been voices if I could have heard them more clearly. The rhythm was almost conversational, rising and falling like dialogue, but the words, if they were words, remained indistinct. The sound drew me forward even as every rational part of my mind urged me to turn back. The building's shadow fell across me long before I reached the entrance, and in that shadow the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath began to mist, and I felt the hairs on my arms stand up beneath my sleeves, but I continued walking, pulled by a compulsion I didn't understand and couldn't resist. Before the approach, there was the discovery of the location. I stood at the end of a street that seemed to exist in defiance of the surrounding area. The building rose from empty lots like a tooth from a diseased gum, isolated and somehow wrong. The address matched what I had written down, but seeing it in person made me question whether I had copied the numbers correctly. This couldn't be the place I was looking for, and yet I knew with absolute certainty that it was. The structure appeared to be much older than anything else in the vicinity, built from stone and timber that had weathered to a uniform gray. Its architecture belonged to no particular style I could identify, as if it had been designed by someone with only a vague understanding of how buildings should look. Windows were placed asymmetrically, some too large, others too small, creating a facade that was unsettling to look at directly. The surrounding lots were empty, filled with weeds and scattered debris, but I could see the foundations of other buildings, as if an entire neighborhood had been demolished and only this one structure had been left standing. The contrast was jarring, making the building seem even more isolated and unnatural. I checked the address again, comparing it to what I had written on the scrap of paper. The numbers matched perfectly. This was where I was supposed to be, where I had been directed to come, but looking at the building filled me with a dread so profound that my legs felt weak. Before finding the address, there was the phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, giving me directions with the precision of someone reading from written notes. The speaker's tone was neutral, neither male nor female, with an accent I couldn't place. They spoke slowly, as if to ensure I understood every word, pausing after each instruction to allow me to write it down. I found myself taking notes without consciously deciding to do so, my hand moving across the paper automatically. The pen felt strange in my fingers, heavier than it should have been, and the ink flowed with unusual thickness. Each letter seemed to burn itself into the paper, leaving impressions that went deeper than normal writing should. The caller gave me an address, a time, and specific instructions about which entrance to use. They told me to bring nothing except myself, to tell no one where I was going, and to come alone. The instructions felt less like suggestions and more like commands, delivered with an authority I didn't question at the time. When I asked who was calling and why they wanted to see me, the line went quiet for so long I thought the connection had been lost. Then the voice returned, softer now, almost intimate, telling me that I already knew the answers to those questions that I had always known, and that pretending otherwise was simply a waste of time. The call ended without a goodbye, leaving me staring at the notes I had taken, wondering why I felt compelled to follow these bizarre instructions from a stranger. Before the phone call, there was the waiting. I sat in my chair, staring at the silent telephone, knowing it would ring but not knowing how I knew. The anticipation built in my chest like pressure in a sealed container, growing stronger with each passing moment. My hands were damp with sweat, and I wiped them repeatedly on my pants, but the moisture returned immediately. The room felt different during this waiting period, charged with potential energy. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct, as if my senses had been heightened in preparation for something significant. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, with unusual clarity. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a countdown. I tried to distract myself with routine activities, but nothing held my attention. Books felt foreign in my hands, their words swimming meaninglessly across the pages. Television programs played without registering in my consciousness. Food had no taste, water no temperature. Everything felt distant and unreal except for the telephone and my certainty that it would soon demand my attention. When I attempted to leave the room, to go outside or even to another part of the house, I found myself turning back before I reached the door. Some invisible force, some magnetic pull, kept me anchored to that chair, waiting for a call I had never been told to expect. Before the waiting, there was the first sign. I woke to find a business card on my nightstand, though I was certain it hadn't been there when I went to sleep. The card was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with text printed in a deep red ink that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at it. There was no company name, no logo, just a phone number in an elegant font that hurt my eyes to focus on. I picked up the card and felt a slight electric shock, as if it were charged with static electricity. The paper was warm to the touch and had a texture that was simultaneously smooth and rough, like skin. When I held it up to the light, I could see watermarks or impressions beneath the surface, patterns that might have been letters or symbols but were too faint to decipher clearly. The smell of the card was distinctive, organic, and slightly sweet, like flowers that had been pressed between pages for years. But underneath that pleasant scent was something else, something that reminded me of metal and salt and things better left unnamed. The combination was nauseating and compelling at the same time. I turned the card over and over in my hands, searching for additional information, but found none. Just the phone number, printed in that strange red ink that seemed to pulse with its own light. I knew, without understanding why, that I would eventually dial that number, that the card's appearance in my room was the beginning of something I couldn't avoid or escape. Story 8. The candle's wick had just extinguished, leaving only the faint scent of melted wax. My skin prickled as though the air had shifted, despite the room's heavy warmth. I pressed my palm against the wooden table, feeling its steady presence beneath my hand. The shadows stretched strangely, contours blending in unusual patterns. It was in this quiet stillness that I noticed the silence had changed, subtle and imperative. That's where it starts, where I can grab hold of something solid, but everything before that moment, everything after, it fragments like glass hitting concrete. I've been trying to piece it together, you understand. The doctors say trauma does this. Makes your mind protect itself by forgetting, but forgetting what? I remember the texture of that table. Smooth wood with a single groove running along the edge where someone had dragged something sharp across it. My fingernail caught in that groove, such a small thing, but it anchors me. It proves I was there wherever there was. The smell comes back sometimes when I'm not expecting it, not the wax, something else, metallic and warm like copper pennies left in the sun. It fills my nostrils and I'm somewhere else entirely, a different room. The walls were closer together, or maybe I was smaller, or maybe the space was shrinking. There was a sound, a hum that seemed to come from inside my skull rather than from any machine or wire. Low and constant, like the world's largest tuning fork had been struck somewhere beneath my feet. When I concentrate on it now, my teeth ache. My jaw clenches without permission. I keep a notebook beside my bed. When the fragments come, I write them down before they dissolve. Some nights I fill 3 pages. Other nights I stare at the blank paper until dawn creeps through the blinds. The handwriting changes. Sometimes it's mine, careful and measured. Other times it's frantic, like someone else grabbed my hand and forced the words out. The door was breathing, I wrote once. I don't remember writing it, but there it is in my own script. What does that even mean? Doors don't breathe. But when I read those words, something in my chest tightens. My throat closes. I know it's true even though it's impossible. The light behind the door, that comes back clearer than most things. Not electric light, not candlelight, something that pulsed with its own rhythm like a heartbeat made visible. It leaked through the gap at the bottom, painting a thin line across the floor. I watched that line for what felt like hours, or maybe minutes. Time wasn't working properly. My feet were bare, the floor was cold. These details surface with absolute clarity while everything else swims in fog. I can still feel that chill seeping up through my soles, spreading through my bones, but I can't remember how I got there or why I stayed. Someone was with me, not talking, just present. I catch glimpses in my peripheral vision when I'm trying to remember. A figure that doesn't move when everything else is chaos, patient, waiting. When I try to look directly, they're gone, but the feeling of being watched remains, heavy as a wool blanket in summer heat. The air grew thick, that's another constant in these fragments. The atmosphere itself became dense, like breathing through wet cloth. Each inhale required effort, each exhale felt insufficient. My lungs worked harder but delivered less. The oxygen seemed to thin out, replaced by something else, something that tasted of rust and electricity. I found marks on my arms afterward. Small, precise indentations that formed no pattern I could recognize. They didn't hurt, which somehow made them worse. Pain would have been normal. Pain would have made sense. But they were just there, pressed into my skin like I'd been handled by something with very specific fingers. The notebook contains sketches I don't remember making. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. Lines that seem to bend even when drawn straight. Circles that appear to rotate on the page when I'm not focusing on them. I've shown them to people, asked if they see the movement too. They always say no. They always look at me with that careful expression people wear around broken things. Water dripping, that sound threads through every memory fragment, steady and rhythmic, like a metronome keeping time for an orchestra I couldn't see, but there was no visible source. No leak, no faucet, no condensation, just the sound echoing from everywhere and nowhere. When I hear dripping now, even from a kitchen tap, my hands shake. The temperature dropped suddenly, not gradually like weather changing, but all at once like someone had opened a door to winter. My breath became visible in small puffs that dissipated too quickly. The cold felt targeted, personal. It wrapped around me specifically while leaving everything else untouched. The table stayed warm under my palm even as frost formed on my exhaled breath. I was looking for something. This certainty emerges from the chaos like bedrock beneath shifting sand. I had come to that place, that room, that situation with purpose. But the purpose has been carved out of my memory with surgical precision. I remember the urgency, the desperate need to find whatever it was. I remember the disappointment of failure. But the object itself, the reason for searching, remains a perfect void. My reflection was wrong in the window. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically altered, just subtly off, like a photograph slightly out of focus. My face was my face, but the proportions felt foreign. My eyes seemed too far apart, or too close together, or positioned at the wrong angle. When I moved, the reflection followed, but with a delay that made my stomach clench with wrongness. The humming intensified. It climbed in pitch until it scraped against the inside of my skull like fingernails on bone. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was already inside, had always been inside, was part of me now. My vision blurred, the room tilted. Everything became fluid except for that constant, maddening vibration. I spoke to someone, had a conversation that felt crucial, life-altering. Words were exchanged that changed something fundamental about reality, but I can only remember the shape of speech, the cadence of question and answer, the weight of revelation. The actual words have been stripped away, leaving only the echo of their importance. Something was taken from me, not stolen exactly. Given up willingly, though I can't remember making that choice. I feel the absence like a missing tooth, my tongue constantly probing the gap where something essential used to be. It wasn't physical. Nothing was removed from my body, but some part of me, some capacity or understanding, was surrendered in that room with the breathing door and the impossible light. The figure moved closer. This memory arrives with startling clarity. They approached with deliberate steps, each footfall silent despite the hard floor. Their outline remained indistinct, as if they were made of the same substance as shadows, but denser, more intentional. When they reached me, they extended something that might have been a hand. I reached back. Our contact felt like touching the surface of deep water. My watch stopped, the hands frozen at an impossible time, neither matching the position of the sun nor the feeling of the hour. But more than stopped, the face had changed. Numbers I didn't recognize had replaced the familiar 12, symbols that suggested meaning without revealing it. The second hand trembled between two positions, unable to choose, vibrating with indecision. The taste of copper filled my mouth. Not blood, though similar, something older and more fundamental, like licking the core of the earth itself. It coated my tongue and teeth, impossible to wash away or swallow down. Even now, focusing on that memory, the flavor returns, metallic and alive and completely wrong for human perception. I made a promise. The knowledge sits in my chest like swallowed stone. Words were spoken, an agreement reached, a commitment made that binds me still. But to what, to whom? The obligation remains, pressing against my ribs with every breath, but its nature stays hidden. Sometimes I catch myself about to do something, following an impulse I don't understand, honoring a contract I can't remember signing. The room began to change. Walls shifted position when I wasn't watching directly. The ceiling lowered or raised itself by inches at a time. Furniture rearranged itself with patient persistence. Each time I turned away and looked back, something had moved, not dramatically, just enough to confirm that the space wasn't bound by normal rules. The table with its groove remained constant, my only anchor in a sea of architectural uncertainty. Light bled through my closed eyelids. Even with my eyes shut tight, even facing away from any source, brightness penetrated my skull and painted strange visions on the inside of my mind. Geometric patterns that pulsed with their own rhythm. landscapes that couldn't exist under any sun I knew, faces that almost looked familiar but dissolved when I tried to focus on their features. My clothes felt wrong, not uncomfortable exactly, but like they belonged to someone else. The fabric had the right texture, the correct weight, but they hung on my body strangely, as if my proportions had shifted slightly, or the garments had been cut for a person who was almost, but not quite me. I kept adjusting them, trying to make them fit properly, but they remained persistently alien. The conversation continued without words. Communication flowed between me and the figure through means I couldn't identify. Not telepathy, nothing so simple. More like the transfer of pure concept, meaning moving from one mind to another without the intermediate step of language. I understood completely while it happened. Now I remember only the sensation of understanding, not the content of what was shared. Something was growing inside the walls, beneath the floor, in the spaces between spaces. I could feel its expansion like pressure in my ears before a storm. It pushed against the boundaries of the room, testing them, finding weak points. The breathing door was just a symptom. The real change was happening in dimensions I couldn't see but somehow sensed. Reality was being stretched to accommodate something that didn't quite fit. My shadow detached, not dramatically, not obviously, but when I moved, it lingered for a moment before following, like it was considering its options, like it had developed its own agenda. I experimented, raising my arm quickly, stepping sideways without warning. Each time the shadow hesitated, then caught up, but the delay grew longer, the independence more pronounced. The humming stopped, the sudden silence felt like a physical blow. My ears rang with the absence of sound. The world seemed to hold its breath. In that perfect quiet, I heard something else, something that had been hidden beneath the constant vibration. Whispers that weren't quite whispers, movement that wasn't quite movement, the sound of attention being paid by something vast and patient and utterly focused on me. I was changed. This understanding arrives complete and undeniable. Whatever happened in that room, whatever transaction took place, whatever promise was made, it altered me fundamentally. Not visibly. People don't stare or point or comment on my appearance, but I feel the difference in every cell. I am no longer entirely what I was. Some part of me belongs to that place now, to that figure, to that purpose I can't remember agreeing to serve. The candle relit itself. Without match or lighter, without any intervention from me, the wick burst into flame again. The light was wrong, too bright and too steady, casting shadows that fell in directions that defied the physics of illumination. I watched the flame dance with its own wind, following rhythms that had nothing to do with air currents. It burned without consuming the wax, eternal and impossible and beautiful in a way that made my eyes water. I try to return to that place, in dreams, in meditation, in moments when consciousness loosens its grip, but I can never find the path back. The room exists somewhere I can't reach through normal travel. Maybe it was never a physical location at all. Maybe it exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the darkness that lives behind closed eyes. The marks on my arms are fading. Each day they grow lighter, less distinct, as if my skin is slowly healing from an injury I never felt. But as they disappear, something else is happening. New sensations are emerging. A tingling that starts at the old marks and spreads outward. A warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. A sense of connection to something distant but approaching. My notebook is filling itself. Pages I know I left blank contain writing in my hand, messages I don't remember composing, instructions I don't understand, shopping lists for items that don't exist in any store I know, appointments with people who have no names, reminders for tasks that make no sense but feel urgently important. The dreams are getting stronger, more vivid, more coherent, more insistent. I see that room again, but from different angles. I experience conversations I missed the first time, I observe details that were hidden in shadow or confusion. Each night reveals more of the picture, but instead of clarity, I feel growing dread. Some knowledge is too heavy for human minds to carry. I understand now that forgetting was a gift, a mercy extended to protect what remained of my sanity. But gifts can be revoked, mercy can be withdrawn. The barriers in my mind are dissolving, not through my efforts to remember, but because something else is pushing through from the other side. The figure is getting closer. Not physically, I haven't seen them since that night, but I feel their approach like pressure in the atmosphere before a storm. They're coming for me, or calling me back, or simply claiming what was promised. The connection forged in that impossible room grows stronger each day. Soon it will be strong enough to bridge the distance between there and here. I should be afraid, part of me is, but another part, a growing part, feels only anticipation. Whatever I agreed to, whatever I became, whatever price I paid, it's almost time to honor that bargain. The humming has started again, very faintly at the edge of hearing. The air is beginning to thicken. The shadows are stretching in familiar patterns. The candle on my table flickers without wind. The flame dances to that remembered rhythm. Soon it will extinguish itself, and in that moment of darkness, the door will begin to breathe again. I can feel them now. They're almost here. Story 9. I brushed my fingertips across the brittle paper. Its texture contrasted sharply with the surrounding smooth surfaces, sending a slight shiver up my arm. The room, filled with the scent of old ink and dust, felt oddly still, as if holding its breath. A distant creak disturbed the quiet, but my thoughts clung to the strange warmth beneath my fingertips. The paper whispered its secrets, though no sound escaped. Everything seemed unchanged, yet my pulse quickened with a subtle urgency. Perhaps it was only my imagination, but the air carried a weight it had not carried before. To whoever finds this, if anyone ever does, I'm writing this because I can't carry it anymore. The weight of what I've seen, what I've felt, what I think I remember. I've held it inside for so long that it's become part of me, like scar tissue wrapped around my ribs, making it hard to breathe properly, making it hard to sleep, to look people in the eyes, to pretend that everything is normal when nothing has been normal since that night. That's not even accurate. It wasn't just one night. It was gradual, like watching paint dry or ice melt. You don't notice it happening until suddenly everything has changed and you're standing in a different world entirely. I need to tell someone, even if that someone is just the silence that will swallow these words after I'm gone. Even if you're just my own reflection, distorted and unrecognizable, staring back at me from some future I won't see. The humming started first. That's what I remember most clearly, though clear might be the wrong word. It was like a frequency just below hearing, something you feel in your bones rather than process with your ears. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, always 3, never 2:58 or 3:05, with that vibration running through my chest cavity like someone had installed a tuning fork where my heart should be. At first I thought it was the refrigerator, then the air conditioning, then the neighbor's something or other bleeding through thin walls. But when I pressed my ear to every surface, every appliance, every pipe and wire and vent, the sound remained constant, unchanging, like it was coming from inside me. The paper in my hands right now, I found it that first morning after the humming began. Just sitting on my kitchen table, though I don't remember putting it there. Don't remember owning any paper that old, that fragile, that warm to the touch. The warmth is still there. Even now, weeks or months later, time has become fluid, unreliable. It pulses with its own heat. I've tried throwing it away, burning it, tearing it into pieces, but it always returns, usually in places I hadn't left it, under my pillow, in the medicine cabinet, folded inside books I haven't opened in years, always perfectly intact, always waiting. You have to understand, I was normal before this. I paid my bills on time and remembered to water plants and called my mother every Sunday. I had routines, patterns, a life that made sense in all the small, predictable ways that lives are supposed to make sense. But then the humming came, and with it, the watching. I can't explain the watching properly because it doesn't follow any rules I understand. It's not eyes in windows or shadows that move wrong or any of the obvious things you might expect. It's more like the feeling you get when you realize someone has been in your house while you were gone, even though nothing is missing and everything appears exactly as you left it. The air itself feels different, touched, rearranged on some molecular level that your conscious mind can't process, but your animal brain recognizes immediately. The watching happens everywhere now, in grocery stores and parking lots and the space between sleep and waking. It follows me into dreams and out again, leaving me with the certainty that something vast and patient has been observing every breath, every heartbeat, every unconscious gesture I make. Sometimes I catch glimpses in my peripheral vision, not shapes exactly, but disturbances in the visual field, like heat shimmer rising from summer asphalt, except it's winter and I'm indoors and the disturbance moves with purpose. It retreats when I turn my head, but I can feel it settling back into position the moment I look away. The mirror in my bathroom has started reflecting things that aren't there. Or maybe it's reflecting things that are there but shouldn't be. I've stopped looking directly into it, but sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth or washing my face, I'll see movement in the glass that doesn't match my own movements. A hand raised when mine are lowered, eyes that blink out of sequence. A face that might be mine but shifted slightly, as if someone had adjusted the contrast and brightness on a photograph until the person in it became unrecognizable. My mother called last week, or maybe it was last month. She said she'd been worried because she hadn't heard from me, which confused me because I was certain I'd spoken to her recently. Very recently. I could remember the conversation clearly, her voice, the things we discussed, the way she'd laughed at something I'd said about the weather. But when I checked my phone, there was no record of the call, no outgoing calls to her number for weeks. When I tried to tell her about our recent conversation, she went quiet in a way that made my stomach clench. She said I sounded different, distant, like I was speaking from somewhere very far away. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time, trying to reconcile my memory of our conversation with the evidence that it had never happened. Both felt equally real, equally true. The contradiction didn't resolve itself, it just sat there in my mind like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. That's when I started wondering if other things I remembered might be equally unreliable. Conversations with coworkers that left no trace in their memories. Errands I was certain I'd completed, but that remained undone. A growing sense that I was living slightly out of phase with the rest of the world, like a radio station that's almost but not quite tuned to the right frequency. The humming has gotten stronger. It's no longer confined to those 3 a.m. wake-ups. It runs underneath everything now. A constant bass note that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur around the edges. Sometimes I wonder if other people can hear it too, but have learned to tune it out the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic or air conditioning after a while. But when I look at their faces, really look, I see no sign of recognition. No shared acknowledgement of the frequency that's slowly rewriting the fundamental structure of everything I thought I knew about reality. The paper grows warmer in my hands as I write. The ink flows differently now, as if the pen is being guided by something other than my conscious intention. My handwriting looks foreign to me, though though I can't pinpoint exactly what's changed. The letters line at unfamiliar angles. The spacing between words seems deliberate in ways I don't remember choosing. I've started avoiding mirrors entirely, but reflective surfaces are everywhere. Windows at night, the black screen of my phone, the surface of water in glasses and sinks and puddles. In every reflection, that same subtle wrongness, that same sense of looking at someone who shares my face but not my history. Yesterday, or what I think was yesterday, I saw myself walking down the street while I was sitting in a coffee shop. Not someone who looked like me, wearing clothes I owned, moving with my particular gait, carrying the bag I'd left at home on my kitchen counter. I watched myself walk past the window without looking in, without any acknowledgement of my presence inside. I wanted to run outside to follow, to demand an explanation. But my body wouldn't respond to the commands my brain was sending. I sat frozen, watching myself disappear around the corner while the humming in my chest grew so loud I thought surely everyone in the coffee shop would turn to stare. But no one turned. No one seemed to notice anything unusual at all. When I finally made it home, the bag was still on my kitchen counter, exactly where I'd left it. But there was mud on my shoes that I didn't remember stepping in, and my jacket smelled like rain, even though the sky had been clear all day. The watching has intensified too. What used to feel like distant observation now feels immediate, intimate, like something is standing just behind my shoulder, close enough that I should be able to feel its breath on my neck. When I turn, there's never anything there, but the air holds an impression of recent presence, a warmth that doesn't belong to me. I've stopped sleeping in my bed. The mattress has developed a depression that doesn't match the shape of my body, as if someone else has been lying there while I'm away. The sheets are sometimes warm when I return home, though the house has been empty all day. Once I found a strand of hair on my pillow that looked like mine, but felt different between my fingers, coarser, with a texture that made my skin crawl. The dreams, when they come, aren't dreams exactly. They're more like visitations. I find myself in places I've never been, but that feel familiar in a way that bypasses rational memory. Vast spaces filled with a light that doesn't cast shadows. Corridors that extend in directions that don't exist in normal geometry, and always the sense that I'm being shown something important, something I need to understand but that my human brain isn't equipped to process. I wake from these not dreams with my mouth full of words I don't recognize, speaking in a language that sounds almost like English, but with vowels that don't quite fit in my throat and consonants that require tongue positions I didn't know were possible. The words fade quickly, but they leave behind a taste like copper and ozone. My neighbors have started looking at me strangely, or maybe they've always looked at me that way and I'm only now noticing. Their eyes slide past me when we cross paths in the hallway as if I'm not quite there, as if I'm becoming transparent. When I try to make conversation, they respond with the kind of polite confusion you'd show to a stranger who's mistaken you for someone they know. But I've lived here for years. I've borrowed sugar from the woman in 3B and helped the elderly man on the first floor carry his groceries. I've attended building meetings and complained about the broken elevator and signed birthday cards for the super's daughter. Now they look at me like I'm a ghost haunting a life that was never mine. Maybe I am. The paper beneath my hand has grown so warm it's almost uncomfortable to touch, but I can't seem to let go. The words continue to flow, and I have the strange sensation that I'm not writing them so much as uncovering them, as if they were already there, waiting beneath the surface of the page like fossils waiting to be excavated. My reflection in the window across from me, I can see it now in the glass, lit by the lamp beside my chair, doesn't match my movements anymore. It stopped even pretending to. As I write, it sits perfectly still, hands folded in its lap, watching me with an expression I can't read. Its eyes are my eyes, but they hold knowledge I don't remember acquiring. Sometimes I think I'm losing my mind. The thought comes as a relief, actually. Madness would explain everything. Madness would mean that underneath all of this strangeness, reality remains intact and comprehensible. It would mean that the problem is with me, not with the fundamental structure of existence. But madness feels too small to contain what's happening, too limited. This is bigger than delusion or breakdown or any clinical category I can name. This is reality itself becoming unreliable, malleable, subject to revision without notice. The humming has shifted pitch. It's no longer the low, bone-deep vibration I've grown accustomed to. Now it's higher, more urgent, like a signal that's finally locked onto its intended frequency. It fills my head completely, drowning out my own thoughts and replacing them with something else, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. I can feel myself changing, not physically, though maybe physically too, in ways I can't perceive, but fundamentally, essentially. The person who started writing this letter is not the same person guiding the pen now. The transition has been so gradual that I didn't notice it happening, like watching your own hair grow or your own face age. But it's accelerating now. With each word I write, I feel myself becoming more distant from the life I thought was mine. The memories that once felt solid and real now seem like stories I heard secondhand, interesting but ultimately irrelevant to whatever I'm becoming. The watching isn't coming from outside anymore, it's coming from within. I am the watcher now, observing the final dissolution of everything I used to be with a detachment that should terrify me, but instead brings only a strange sense of completion. My reflection in the window has begun to smile. Not my smile, I can feel my own face, and it remains expressionless, focused on the act of writing. But the reflection smiles with what might be satisfaction or anticipation or something beyond human emotion entirely. The paper is burning hot now, but still I can't release it. The words continue to emerge, though I'm no longer certain I understand their meaning. They seem to be written in my language, formed with letters I recognize, but they describe experiences and sensations that have no equivalent in human understanding. I want to warn you, whoever you are, whoever finds this, but I'm not sure what I'm warning you about. The humming, the watching, the gradual dissolution of the boundary between self and other, between real and imagined, between what is and what might be. Or maybe I want to invite you. Maybe that's what this letter has been all along, not a warning, but an invitation. A doorway left open for someone else to walk through. The reflection in the window is standing now, though I remain seated. It's moving toward the glass from the other side, one hand extended as if to push through the barrier between us. Its mouth is moving, forming words I can't hear but somehow understand. It's saying goodbye. Not to you, whoever you are, to me, to who I was, to the small, frightened person who began this letter with such human concerns about being believed, being understood, being remembered. I don't need to be remembered anymore. Memory is just another boundary, another limitation I'm learning to transcend. The humming has become music now, complex and beautiful and completely alien. It fills every cell of my body, every synapse of my brain, rewriting me from the inside out. I should be terrified, but terror is a human emotion, and I'm not entirely human anymore. The paper crumbles to ash in my hands, but the words remain, burned into the air itself, where anyone with eyes to see can read them. The reflection steps through the window like it's made of water. and suddenly I understand that there was never any barrier at all. Never any separation between inside and outside, between self and other, between what was and what is becoming. I'm sorry I can't explain it better. Human language isn't equipped for this kind of translation, but maybe that's okay. Maybe some experiences are meant to be lived rather than described, encountered rather than understood. If you're reading this, if you found these words somehow, somewhere, then maybe you're ready for your own invitation. Maybe you've already started hearing the humming, feeling the watching, noticing the small inconsistencies that suggest reality is more fluid than you've been taught to believe. If so, don't fight it, don't cling to who you think you are. That person was always just a temporary arrangement of atoms and memories and electrical impulses. Let them go. Let yourself become something larger, stranger, more wonderful than you ever imagined possible. The paper is gone now, but I'm still writing. The words hang in the air like heat shimmer, like breath on cold glass, like light bent through water. They'll wait here for you, for whoever needs to find them, for as long as it takes. I'm going now, not dying, that's too small a word for what's happening. Expanding, dissolving, becoming part of something so much larger than the tiny, frightened person who sat down to write this letter. Don't mourn for me, I'm not disappearing. I'm finally becoming visible. The humming is everywhere now, and I am the humming, and the humming is everything, and everything is. Story 10. The morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the wooden floor. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with that of well-worn leather and cedar. Yet the air hummed with an unsettling quiet, as if the walls held their breath. All seemed routine until a soft creak echoed from the hallway, a sound that shouldn't resound in an empty house. A framed photograph lay slightly ajar, tilting unnervingly as shadows crept in. Nothing happened that night. I want to be very clear about that from the start. People ask me questions sometimes, and I tell them the same thing every single time. Nothing happened. I was home. I went to bed. I woke up the next morning. That's it. That's the whole story. I didn't see anything unusual when I walked to the kitchen. The photograph was probably just loose on its nail. Old houses settle, you know. The wood expands and contracts. That's a perfectly normal explanation for why things might shift around a little bit. I've lived here for years, and I know every sound this place makes. Every creak, every groan, every whisper of wind through the gaps in the window frames. The coffee tasted fine that morning. Maybe a little bitter, but that happens sometimes when you leave the pot on too long. I definitely didn't notice any metallic aftertaste. And if I did, well, the pipes in this neighborhood are old. Sometimes you get a little rust in the water. It's not unusual. It's not a sign of anything. I went about my normal routine. Shower, breakfast, getting dressed for work. Everything was exactly the same as always. I didn't spend any extra time looking out the windows. I wasn't checking the locks on the doors. I certainly wasn't examining my reflection in the bathroom mirror for any marks or changes, because there weren't any. There was nothing to look for. The thing is, I sleep very soundly, always have. So if something had happened during the night, which it didn't, I wouldn't have woken up anyway. I'm a heavy sleeper. I could sleep through a thunderstorm. So the fact that I don't remember anything from the hours between going to bed and waking up is completely normal. That's what sleep is supposed to be like. But I do remember my dreams being particularly vivid that night. Not that dreams mean anything. They're just your brain processing random information. Still, I dreamed about lights, soft blue lights that seemed to move in patterns that were almost like writing, almost like someone was trying to communicate something. But of course, that's ridiculous. Dreams don't mean anything. They're just electrical impulses firing randomly in your sleeping brain. The strange thing about the dream was how quiet everything was. Usually in dreams there's background noise, cars, voices, wind, something. But in this dream the silence was so complete it felt heavy, like it had weight, like it was pressing down on everything. And the lights moved without making any sound at all, which should have been normal but somehow felt wrong. I remember the texture of the surface I was lying on. In the dream, it wasn't my bed, it was something smooth and slightly warm, like metal that had been sitting in sunlight. But that doesn't make sense because the dream took place in darkness. Well, mostly darkness, except for those blue lights that definitely weren't there. When I woke up, my sheets were twisted around my legs in a way that suggested I'd been moving a lot during the night. But I always toss and turn. That's normal for me. The fact that I was sweating even though the house was cold doesn't mean anything either. Sometimes your body just regulates temperature differently during sleep cycles. I did notice that my bedroom door was open when I woke up. I always close it before bed, but maybe I forgot that night. Or maybe the latch doesn't catch properly anymore. Old hardware, things wear out over time. There's nothing sinister about a door being open when you thought you closed it. The hallway looked different in the morning light, but hallways always look different depending on the angle of the sun. The shadows fall in new places. The familiar becomes unfamiliar. It's just a trick of perception. I wasn't seeing anything that wasn't already there. I definitely didn't find any footprints on the hardwood floor. And if there were some marks that looked like they might have been made by bare feet, well, they were probably mine from the night before. I walk around barefoot all the time. It would be more unusual if there weren't footprints. The photograph in the hallway was of my family from years ago. We're all smiling, standing in front of a house I barely remember living in. But that morning, something about our expressions looked different. Not wrong exactly, just different. Like we were smiling at something behind the camera instead of at the camera itself. But photographs don't change. That's impossible. It must have been the lighting, or maybe I was still groggy from sleep. I straightened the frame without really thinking about it. My hands were shaking a little, but I'd just woken up. Low blood sugar, probably. I should have eaten breakfast first. When I touched the glass, it felt warm, which was odd because that part of the hallway doesn't get direct sunlight. But glass can retain heat in unexpected ways. There are probably scientific explanations for things like that. The drive to work was completely normal. Traffic was light. The radio played the usual morning shows, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't keep checking my rear-view mirror. I wasn't looking for anything following me. Why would I be? Nothing had happened that would make me paranoid about being followed. At work, people said I looked tired. A few colleagues asked if I was feeling all right. I told them I was fine because I was. Just because someone looks tired doesn't mean anything significant happened to them. Maybe I needed more coffee. Maybe the lighting in the office was unflattering. People read too much into these things. I did have trouble concentrating that day, but that happens sometimes. Your mind wanders. You find yourself staring out windows or at blank computer screens, thinking about nothing in particular. Or thinking about dreams that felt too real, dreams about being somewhere else, somewhere with that strange warm metal surface and those impossible blue lights that moved like living things. During lunch, I walked past a construction site where they were welding something. The bright arc of the welding torch reminded me of something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The sparks fell in patterns that seemed almost familiar, almost like a language I once knew but had forgotten. But welding sparks are just welding sparks. They don't mean anything. The metallic smell from the construction site followed me for the rest of the day. Or maybe it was just in my imagination. Sometimes smells can trigger memories, even false memories. The human brain is remarkably good at creating connections that don't actually exist. I went home at the usual time, took the usual route. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it that morning. All the windows were closed, all the doors were locked. The photograph in the hallway was straight and properly positioned. Everything was normal. But as I walked through the rooms, turning on lights, I had the strangest feeling that I was retracing steps I'd taken before. Not that morning and not the previous evening. Different steps from a different time that I couldn't quite remember, like muscle memory from an experience that never happened. The kitchen felt smaller than usual. The ceiling seemed lower. I found myself looking up at it more than once, studying the plaster and the light fixture, trying to figure out why it looked wrong. But it was the same ceiling that had always been there. Same cracks, same water stain in the corner from when the upstairs bathroom had leaked. Nothing had changed. I made dinner and ate it while watching television. The news was full of the usual stories about politics and weather and local events. Nothing about missing people or unexplained phenomena. Nothing that would explain why I kept feeling like I should be looking over my shoulder, or why every shadow seemed deeper than it should be. Before bed, I checked all the locks twice. Not because I was worried about anything, just being cautious. It's good to be security conscious. I closed my bedroom door firmly and made sure the latch caught. I even tested it by pushing on it gently. It held. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling that seemed too close and too far away at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forgetting something important. Something that had happened in a place with blue lights and warm metal surfaces and silence so complete it felt like being underwater. I told myself it was just a dream. Dreams feel real sometimes, especially vivid ones. The human brain processes experiences during sleep, and sometimes it creates false memories that seem as real as actual events. That's a well-documented phenomenon. There's nothing mysterious about it. I closed my eyes and tried to think about normal things. Work tomorrow, errands to run, bills to pay. Mundane, everyday concerns that have nothing to do with impossible lights or rooms that shouldn't exist, or the feeling of being examined by something that sees without eyes. Sleep came eventually, and with it the dreams returned. The same blue lights, the same warm metal, the same profound silence. But this time I wasn't alone on that surface. There were others, lying still and quiet, their eyes closed but somehow still aware. I wanted to speak to them, to ask them how they got there, but my voice wouldn't work. None of our voices worked. I woke up before dawn with the absolute certainty that I had never been asleep at all. The bedroom door was open again, and the hallway beyond was filled with a darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I lay very still and listened to the silence, which wasn't really silence at all, but something that pretended to be silence while hiding other sounds underneath. But that was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Old houses make noise at night. Settling wood, shifting foundations, small animals in the walls. There's always a rational explanation for the sounds you hear in the darkness. I got up and closed the door again, testing the latch carefully. It worked perfectly. Whatever had caused it to open during the night was probably just vibrations from traffic outside, or changes in air pressure, or any number of perfectly normal things. The rest of the night passed without incident. I slept deeply and dreamlessly, or at least I don't remember any dreams. When morning came, everything was exactly as it should be. The door was closed, the sheets were neat, the photograph in the hallway was perfectly straight. Nothing happened that night, just like nothing had happened the night before. I'm very sure of that. I would remember if something significant had occurred. The human memory is remarkably reliable for important events, even if it sometimes plays tricks with minor details. I'm going to bed now, same as always. I'll close the door and check the latch and turn off all the lights. Tomorrow will be another normal day, exactly like today and yesterday and all the days before. There's no reason to think otherwise. The blue lights are probably just a recurring dream, nothing more. And if I wake up tomorrow with memories of lying on that warm metal surface again, surrounded by that deliberate silence, I'll know it was just my subconscious mind processing stress or anxiety or too much caffeine. Everything is perfectly normal. Everything is exactly as it should be. And if the lights are a little brighter tonight, if the silence feels a little more expectant, well, that's probably just my imagination too.